Greetings and welcome to a video tutorial where I'm going to teach you a fighting line for the black pieces against the queen's gambit. At first, I would like to cover the very first moves and explain the reasons behind them, and then we're going to go into what we call Cambridge spring variation. That is going to be the main portion of the video. So our opponents, they start the game with d4. We're going to be playing d5, and the main idea of this move is to really be fighting for the e4 square, so that white wouldn't be able to strike with e4. Now after c4, we're playing e6, and the purpose of this move is to be able to take back on d5 with the pawn to keep control over the e4 square. White is exerting pressure against d5, we're fighting for the d5 square as well as the e4 square, and white plays the classical move bishop g5 that has been there forever. In this position, we're going to be playing a very interesting move, knight bd to d7. Now, if you see this for the first time, you might be wondering, isn't black just blundering the pawn over here on d5? We're setting the so-called elephant trap. Really, they cannot win the pawn over here. If they're going to be taking here twice, seems like our knight is pinned right now to the queen, and so they're winning a pawn. But we can take this knight because we're setting up this bishop b4 check. And their queen is hanging also at the same time. They're piece down, so they likely, well, if they're already in this position, gonna take our queen. And then we have bishop b4 check. The only move for white is to lose their own queen. And in this position, after we collect the bishop on d8, black is ending up a piece up. So you set up this nice trap, and if white players are more newcomers to the game, they might fall for this. Now, most of the players, they're going to be playing here e3 or knight to f3, and those lines will be transposing. And here we're going to be playing another interesting move, pawn to c6. Now, the idea of this move is to prepare our queen's movement to the square a5. Here we hope to apply pressure on the knight on c3 with methods of knight to e4 and bishop to b4. And I will show you there are quite a few ways we can set up interesting traps over there. And I will show you how to play with the black pieces if white is playing the absolute top moves. So in this position, I want to look at the move knight to f3. That's the most common move at all levels. And we play our move queen to a5. So not only we're setting up this pin, which allows us to strike with knight e4 next, but also our queen, if you notice, is going to be looking at the white's dark square bishop. And that's a lot of the times a tactical idea. And here we have branches. White has a lot of choices. First, let's take a look at not such good moves for white, but moves that are natural. For example, bishop to d3. So in this position with black, we can take on c4. They're going to be taking back. And we have the move knight to e4. Here, black is already doing better. You see that we're exerting pressure against c3. We're hitting it twice, as well as we're hitting the bishop over here the second time as well. So I think that at the very least, black is slightly better with perfect play. Now let's go back. Let's take a look at another move, which is a3. Preventing the bishop to b4 pin over here. So in this position, I want you to play knight e4 again. And here is one of the traps. If they play bishop d3, which might seem to be natural, after knight takes c3, they have this queen to d2. So here, black is slightly bit better, but we're not gaining as much advantage as we could if we played the correct move over here, which is first knight takes g5, and then d takes c4, preparing this discovered attack. So they have to take the piece back, and after pawn takes c4, we have this double attack, and black ends up winning a piece. Now, these traps, they're really commonly occurring, and it's not unusual for white to be blundering this if we're talking about beginner to intermediate level. Of course, beginner intermediate levels are subjective depending on who you ask. Now, if in this position they're playing the correct move, which is queen to c2, applying more defensive forces against c3, which was under pressure, we can simply take the bishop on g5. So already we're gaining the bishop pair advantage. And after d takes c4, because we're hitting the knight, we're ready to hold on to the pawn c4 by playing the pawn move to b5. All right, so in this position, we have looked at bishop d3, and we have also looked at a3. Let's take a look at good options for white. So one of the moves that they could play is c takes d5. We're going to be taking back with the knight, and again apply pressure against c3. And in this position, queen to c2 again is not so accurate because they're not unpinning. We can play bishop to b4, applying even more pressure. And one of the tactical ideas we have is taking advantage of the pin knight on c3 to take the pawn on a2. So black here is better because they're pawn up. So the correct move for white to fight against these pins is actually queen to d2. This move is unpinning that. So for example, bishop to b4, rook to c1, we can win a tempo on the bishop with h6. For example, pawn to c5, trying to equalize in space, because this pawn on d4 is always in a lot of openings after queen's gambit, is what provides white with extra space, so their pieces have slightly bit better squares in the center. So this strike c7 to c5 or c6 to c5 is very common in queen's gambit decline, queen's gambit accepted, so that we would have equal amount of pawns that fight for the territory in the opponent's camp. So for example, a3 is a very popular move. Let me just show you a couple of moves. Black is playing well as white is over here. And this is one of the positions that you could get. White is playing almost the perfect moves, and I would take this position any day. I think that black is doing very well. White is only slightly bit better. Soon our knight is going to get to f5. You can castle, and I think that we have pressure against the white's pawn center over here. So this move c takes d5 is among white's most popular options, and I want to show you one more line over here that involves knight to d2. A little bit weird move, but the idea is to unpin the knight and free it up. And in this position, we're going to be playing d takes c4 to reveal that standard attack against the bishop. So we're ready now to hold on to the pawn. So white takes on f6. We take back. Finally, they win the pawn back, likely with the knight. In order to hit our queen and win a tempo, we have queen to c7 in general. Black's position is very solid, as well as we have the bishop pair. So some moves in order to show you how you can be developing pieces over here. Castles, castles. Rook to d8 is fantastic. This facilitates the pin, and now in the future, as always, we would like to get e5 or c5 to equalize in the so-called space. Bishop to d7 and the development of the light square bishop might look a little bit off, but it's fairly not uncommon when you have the bishop pair to hold it a little bit more passively for the middle game, but in the end game you will be able to move it out to find it activity. Here, the plan of yours is as always to strike with c5 sooner or later, so we're going to be preparing rook to c8 and c5, and the bishop will see the light. Bishop in general has the functionality by ability to go to c6, as well as covering these b5 and a4 squares where some of the white pieces may want to land. So after rook c8 and c5, black reaches the equality, and we're neutralizing the queen's gambit pressure that was played by white. If you're enjoying the video, you can consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach. That's my full-time job for more than a decade. Please reach out. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. See ya.